Thanks very much, James, for that opening prayer and also for your advice. It's really important to me because I'm just, like I say, I'm just a baby learner about our own ways and our own spirituality, our traditions and our ceremonies. But I come with an open heart, a good heart, and I'm looking to learn. I'm learning from people in their mid-20s. I'm 60, and I respect them very much. I just wanted to say that young people teach me a lot, and some of my best teachers are quite young. So my name's Trevor Glenn Stratton. Did you know my middle name was Glenn? And my dad's name was also Trevor, so I'm actually Trevor Jr. And my mom's name was Glenna. That's where I get the Trevor Glenn Stratton from. But recently, my spirit name came to me in Anishinaabemowin, and my name is Beneshi Odewan, which translates roughly into Thunderbird Heart. But I also have a couple of other names given to me by my family. All my uncles, ever since I was little, have called me Traveler, which really actually fits because I travel. I love traveling. I'm very comfortable all by myself traveling around. And my aunties have always called me Treasure. And I'm hoping it's because they love me so much because I love them very much. And some of them are still alive and give me advice to this very day. Um, Here I am. I'm on Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. I'm a citizen of this Mississauga Anishinaabe Nation. I come from the Salt family from my mom's side. My dad's English Canadian, and I'll explain that a little bit more later. I work for CAAN. We used to be called the Canadian Aboriginal AIDS Network, and now we are the Communities, Alliances, and Networks, still CAAN, and I'm now the Indigenous Leadership Policy Manager at CAN. So, this is really interesting for me to talk about lived experience and talk about testing. It actually fills my heart and, charges up my batteries so I can continue to do some of the really, the work in my head. I'm always working in my head on the computer. So this is really nice to be able to get out and share from the heart. Some of the work previously, I've been at CAN for like 20 years. And before that, I was on the board. So one of my positions was IPHA liaison, and that's liaison for Indigenous people living with HIV and AIDS. I did that part-time for about 11 years. I've worked community mobilization projects, medical marijuana background paper way back in the day before it all went legal. I was a harm reduction project coordinator, a community readiness project coordinator. I've coordinated Indigenous AIDS Awareness Week campaigns in the past. And for about 10 or 11 years, I was the coordinator of the International Indigenous Working Group on HIV and AIDS for CAN. And CAN served as a secretariat for that global work, mobilizing Indigenous communities around the response to HIV, wherever we could connect with them globally. So I do have a smudge going here. I have a eagle fan here that was given to me by Sedalia Fazio, a Mohawk elder from Ganasatake in Montreal. And I also have my turtle claw rattle, which I got from my cousin before he passed away. And his name was Wayne Salt. And this is the strawberry moon. We're in the strawberry moon phase right now. And I remember it passing over. Of course, it's not the full moon right now, but it coincides with the ripening of wild strawberries. And all around here in this yard, because I'm in a clearing in an oak forest on the reserve here, there's wild strawberries all over the place. And they're quite beautiful. And there's blooms, yellow blooms, and really bright red little baby strawberries all over the place. They're the really good medicine strawberries too, eh? And I learned that the strawberries actually, we call it, it translates from Ojibwe or Anishinaabemowin into heartberry because it's shaped like a heart. I mean, not the heart with the pointy bottom like we see in Valentine's Day cards, but a real heart, that's the way it's shaped, representing love and emotional honesty and healing. And it talks about, the teachings talk about the building of strong relationships with all creation and interconnectedness. And I learned this from Elder Betty McKenna in Saskatchewan, that if you ever look at strawberries, they have little runners everywhere, right? And all those strawberries, they're connected with each other all by those little runners. And that's that network, that interconnectedness of all of our hearts connected together. And they're also a good, cleansing medicine for the leaves, and the berries are good cleansing medicine for the blood, and also makes your heart strong. So heartberry makes a lot of sense to me. And when we're talking about everyone being connected, that's what we mean, I think, when we use in English the expression, all my relations, that I'm connected to everything, including the stars and every grain of sand. So I wanted to start that way, because I know that these occur on the moons, on each moon, 13 moons in the year. And in our community, it's a time to gather. There's feasts, and the weather's getting great, and the bounty's starting to come in, all the buds are all popping open and everything. And of course, we reflect on the teachings of the ancestors from, the winter and storytelling time. And now, the thunder beings wake up, and things change a lot. This weekend, a bunch of people from our community are having a water gathering, water ceremony for 3 days on the Credit River. And that's why we're called Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We come from the Credit River, and we used to live down what is now in the Credit Valley Conservation Authority. We're going there to exercise our treaty rights and to use that shoreline, which gives us rights in those treaties we signed. Of course, we can't hunt and fish anymore. There's people and buildings everywhere, but we can sure do our ceremonies along the shores of the river, not only for the Credit River water, but all water, all of our oceans, and the waters that are not doing so well in some of the places in the world, including probably the Credit River. I wouldn't eat a fish out of there right now. It's also coincides, the Strawberry Moon, with National HIV Testing Days in a couple days. It's in 3 days on June 27th. National Indigenous Peoples Day, of course, June 21st. It just passed. National Indigenous History Month is this month. And then our water gathering. So lots going on around here. And I know some of the previous webinars, you guys talked about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and Indigenous healing and harm reduction, which I'm going to touch on harm reduction. Reclamation of Indigenous ways of healing, I'm going to talk about that too. Allyship and harm reduction, talk a bit about that. Land-based practices on the trap line. I don't have any trap lines around here, but I'm definitely land-based here. De-escalation on the front line, probably not so much of that, although maybe my experience as a client in harm reduction. International approaches, I have a lot of experience in that. For harm reduction, I'm not going to touch on that. But gender-based violence, probably not. Maybe, you never know, it might come in, because I'm going to be speaking from the heart. So I never know what's going to come out. And of course, I'll be talking a little bit about grief and loss and substance use, right? But this one's about navigating HIV self-testing as ceremony. And guess what? I've only ever been tested once for HIV, and that was in 1990, 35 years ago. And of course, it was a positive test result for HIV. But when I talk about testing, it's not just about a one-off HIV test and then goodbye and good luck, You need to understand the nature of HIV. I do. I needed to know the nature of HIV. I needed to understand, how do you get it? How do you find out if you have it? And how do you live with it? That seems very important. To me, that's the most important thing. How do you live with HIV? If I didn't have HIV, probably the most important thing would be, how do I not get HIV? Or how is it transmitted, right? Because HIV is a teacher. The spirit of HIV is extremely powerful, but it's also very tricky. From my experience, it's a trickster, and it will trick you. And be careful if you sign a contract with the spirit of HIV, be very careful. It's a very tricky thing. So, but what about, when I talk like this, I'm thinking about everything that leads up to testing. All that stuff in a person's life that leads up to the moment they test, and then everything that happens after testing. Because it's not just about that flash in the pan, that what, minute and a half that it takes to withdraw the blood. and the minute and a half it takes the diagnostic machine to give the result. That's not, are we really just talking about that? Even if you test negative, there's usually a reason why a person would show up and get tested. Like maybe they feel they've been exposed to the possibility of acquiring HIV, of getting it, right? And then we can talk about prevention. If someone shows up for testing, they test negative, then you can talk about, why'd you come in, and is there anything we can do to help you with prevention? Then you can start talking about PrEP, right? Pre-exposure prophylaxis, which is a pill you can take every day that prevents you from getting HIV, even if you're exposed to it. And sometimes I get people ask me to talk about PrEP too, but of course, I've never used it. I've been HIV positive for 35 years. PrEP's only been around for, 5-7 years or something like that. So of course I haven't used it. But people living with HIV, it's important to know about PrEP, because if we're attracted or enter into a relationship with someone who's not living with HIV, it's important that they know that there's an opportunity for them to access PrEP and reduce their chances of getting it. Even if I have an undetectable viral load, it's some people just like to know on their own, I've done something to protect myself, and they go out and use PrEP. So that's a big part of the conversation too. It's not just about testing, it's about prevention. I mean, what if you test negative? If you test positive, of course, you live as healthy as possible, or, get support if you can. But if you're negative, you also, there's also options of how to stay negative, right? But, it's called testing as ceremony. I've always been confused by by some spiritual practices and some of the terminology around culture and ceremony. What is ceremony? I was trying to figure that out. What is prayer? What is meditation? These are really basic questions, because these words are thrown around all the time. You just need to pray. You just need more ceremony. You need that ceremony. You need to meditate. And I'm like, what in the world is this? As growing up, I have a better idea now, but it took me 60 years to get here, right? I was told by one of my young teachers who knows Ojibwe, speaks Ojibwe, and who leads on the Thunderbird drum. He said the translation for the Anishinaabe word for ceremony, and I don't remember the word because I'm still learning. The translation is putting things in order, which I thought, really, wow, putting things in order, because everything has to be just right, when you're setting up the ceremony stuff and the protocols and it's putting things in order, doing things in the right sequence and in the right shapes, right? And spiritually, it sets you up for that's what the ceremony is, to put things in order. And no one taught me this, but the prayer, my understanding is like it's setting intention, setting out your intention. This is what I want. This is what I see, and this is the goal, and this is what we're working toward. This is what we're doing the ceremony toward. But I can't help but wonder, is like, do you really ask for things? I mean, I want a diamond ring. Can I petition the universe or petition creator and just say, I want a diamond ring, I want a diamond ring? I don't know. See, I have questions. I see it as setting an intention. I want to be a good example. I want to share a good heart. That's how I pray. Or I pray for others. I want my nephew to find his strength because it's there. I'm not asking for things that don't already exist. I'm asking for enlightenment, I think. Meditation, I remember I went to see an elder, a seer elder, and his name was Sugar Bear. He died many decades ago. And he was an elder seer from Waldron Island First Nation, just south of here. And he asked me, do you ever meditate? And I was sitting there in my young upstart, hungover way. And I was like, yeah, I meditate. And he laughed. He laughed for like a good minute because he thought that was hilarious. That tickled his funny bone. And I was so insulted. But now I look back and I laugh now. I laugh at me, the old me or the young me, because I had no idea what meditation is. And now I just see it as channeling energy. When you close your eyes and you stop thinking and you're you're just existing and as energy that is with this other universal energy, and you align with it. It's not, and it's not the mind. The mind should shut up to meditate. And that's, I used to have a problem with that. I still do. It's a challenge, but I'm getting there. I'm a baby learner, like I mentioned to Elder James. I remember my first sweat was here at New Credit on a reserve here. And it was my mom's 1 year after she died. She died of cancer, and we had a 1 year ceremony, and we had a 4-day sacred fire. And I didn't really connect with Creator. I didn't know how to channel and connect then. And I went straight back to my tent and went to bed after the sweat and after dancing my mom into the spirit world, and we did all that. And it was very spiritual to me, but I didn't really understand the feelings I was getting, or the dreams that I had that night. But right next to that circle, the sacred fire with the big circle around it in our dance arena that we made, there was a tent as well. A square tent popped up where the Christian part of my family held their what would you call it? It was a kind of ceremony. There was music and prayer and communal prayer and singing, and people were playing, bluegrass music. There was a fiddle and a banjo, and Aunt Doris was playing the spoons, and everybody was laughing, and no one judged each other. And there it was, the Christian way and the traditional way together there in the backyard. And it was pretty darn cool. I really appreciated that they came together and that there was peace and there was harmony in the family. I just love that. I don't like it when our people fight. So I was born to Glenna Marie Salt. She wasn't always a Stratton. I belonged to the Salt family here on the reserve. And my dad was Trevor Ross Stratton, with background English, Irish, and German. And my earliest memories, I thought I was white. We lived in a nuclear family. My dad's mom, my white grandmother, she lent the mortgage money to my parents to put money down on a brand new house that had just been being built, and it was in like a subdivision that was under construction. Right next door, the house was still being built, construction all around. My dad was a TV news anchorman, right? Like he did the news on the TV. And my mom, and he was a university student. My mom was paying that because she worked at Algoma Steel in Sault Ste. Marie, up in Northern Ontario. Algoma Steel is one of Canada's biggest steel producing companies. And she used to be a computer key punch operator. And I don't know, computers used to be as bigger than my house, like big, huge. And they didn't run on digital off and on. They ran on these cards, these cardboard cards with little holes punched in them. And you'd feed those super fast through the computer, and that's how that was their programming. That was how you programmed a computer, with those cards. And she used to be a computer key punch operator. She'd punch the little holes in these things, believe it or not. And that's the way she was paying for my dad's university education. My earliest memory of this reserve was when I was 4 years old. I didn't realize what was going on, but my uncle Carl was in the hospital experiencing cancer, and he was really super sick. So we went down there. I didn't, 4 years old, I didn't understand why everybody was crying. I started crying, you bet, when we brought our cat, my little cat Kiki, the first cat I ever had, escaped somehow. It ran out the door, never came back. There, it went off into the reserve. And that was a huge loss for me. I don't remember ever feeling such a loss ever. That was my first devastating loss, and I was just crying about the emptiness in my heart. But yeah, I remember that sadness more than my uncle dying. I understood the cat's death, but I didn't understand that my uncle was having experienced a life-threatening cancer. But my mom was very, very close to my uncle Carl. He was a war veteran too, eh? And there was a lot of praying, I remember. And it was different to me because I had never seen this before. And it was kind of it was a Pentecostal Christian way of praying. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And about 2 years later, we're moving on. I was about 6 or 7 years old by now. And I remember back in Sault Ste. Marie in a different house about, I had an argument with my little brother. He's about a year and a half older than me. We were just little kids at the bottom of the basement stairs, sitting on the basement floor. I remember it clearly. And we were so mad at each other. And we were playing with those little plastic cowboys and Indians. And we both wanted to be the cowboys. And we were pulling each other's hair and punching each other in the ribs and everything. And my mom came down and, what the heck's going on down here? Will you guys stop? What's going on? And she calmed us down and we explained what was going on. And then she said, well, we're Indians. I'm an Indian. And we were like, what? That's the first time anybody ever told us that. And so, of course, after she left, she had a big, long, loving talk with us. And after that, she went back upstairs. And of course, we started fighting again about who wanted to be. We were fighting over the Indians. We both wanted to be Indians after that. So it didn't stop the fight, but it sure changed the dynamic a lot. Right. But my parents used to argue a lot all the time. I do remember that from when I was a kid. My mom would be crying and we'd walk in and say, ask your dad why, blah, 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 blah. And we're like, what? What's going on? We didn't know the dynamic. We're way, way too young to understand why they're always yelling and why they're both so angry. And eventually they separated. So I was around 7, my brother's around 5 or 6. We went into, at this point, we're living in that new house that I talked about, brand new house. So my dad moved out. My Aunt Sandra moved in. My mother's sister moved in. So there was my mom and my brother and I. My Aunt Sandra had 3 kids, Scott, Mike, and April, 2 boys and a girl. They moved in. And then 2 other divorced moms who were friends of theirs moved in too. And one of them had a one young boy and a baby, and the other one had just a baby. So there were 8 kids in there and 4 moms. And at different times, various dads, separated dads, would come to the door crying and, with the chain and, please, please, their lips are through, please, their arms are going through, please, Wanda, please talk to me, and none of them, they stuck together because they felt like they were in abusive relationships. And that went on for about a year where we were, 8 kids and 4 moms until the house sold. And we moved back down south near here to the Niagara region. And that's when I realized, oh, wow, I am really an Indian. Because suddenly we didn't live in white suburbia anymore in a brand new house. We lived in, a broken down rental house in the rurally. And we didn't have a lot of money. And and our extended Indigenous family and relatives didn't have a lot of money either. Everyone's driving around in used trucks. I thought the rich ones were the truck drivers because they always had like a new Jimmy in the driveway, and a lot of prayer meetings, a lot of Christian prayer meetings were happening in Niagara. But I had a secular upbringing, meaning that my dad was an atheist this time. So in my formative years, I had no religious or spiritual teachings whatsoever. So I took on this atheist belief system because it made a lot of sense to me. How could there be a God? That's ridiculous. And I started to believe in the superstition of what? Materialism, right? And but in this case, the Indianness, this Christianity thing, they embraced being indigenous. They were Christian in an indigenous way, you know. So I was kind of raised by Christian Pentecostal family, would celebrate being drunk in the spirit of the Lord and all singing and speaking in tongues and dancing and singing Christian bluegrass and gospel with the banjo and the fiddle and the guitar and the bass and the spoons playing and all that. And I used to sing with my extended family, and I loved it. I loved sing. I still love singing, and my other relations too, not just my family. And I was also sometimes sing with my mom, just her and I. My brother sang way off key. He couldn't. He was just distracting us. He'd get us going off key, right? But I love the feeling of the kinship, or what they called fellowship. And I think I understand it more as kinship these days, the way I understand our traditions and kinship and the kinship system. But I remember they used to say, someday you'll be a preacher, Trevor. They saw something in me in the way I spoke, I guess, or the way I come across, and just figured I'd follow in their footsteps. But I knew that that wasn't the path for me. Well, first of all, I was an atheist. I didn't believe in any creator or I didn't understand any kind of connecting with the universe or anything like that. I was disconnected. I was disconnected, identifying as an atheist. No concept of that universal energy. No concept that we're made up of, no understanding of how we're made up of stardust. But I was always very curious about our traditional teachings and our traditional spirituality. You know, my grandmother was Mohawk, German. She's Lorna, her name was Lorna Froman from Six Nations, right? She'd Haudenosaunee. And I asked her, do you ever remember getting any teachings or any prayers or anything that's traditional from your side of the family? And she said, don't ever ask me that again. That's devil worship. And she was really, literally shaking her finger in my face. So that shut me down there. The next time I visited my grandparents on their strawberry farm, I talked to my grandfather that time, Peter Salt. We knew him as Fred Salt. Now, he went by Fred, but his real name was Peter, which is my brother's name too. And I asked him the same question. And he was Mississauga Ojibwe, of course, but he's also French and had some Irish blood in there too. Interesting mix. And he identified as an Orangeman, which always confused me. That Irish Orangeman, I didn't get it. But he said, yeah, I remember my grandmother, he said, she ran an Indian medicine shop. And he used to go out into the woods and into the fields or wherever, and he used to pick medicines with her. And to this day, I have this image in my head of her holding this little boy's hand and teaching him, pointing and testing him. What's that? What's that? I have that in my head. It'll never leave me. So I thank my grandfather for that. Chimigwich, Mishomas, every day. And Lorna, my grandmother, she thanked Jesus Christ every day for saving her family. Because before her husband, Peter, who I knew as Fred, before he was what they call saved by Jesus Christ in the Bible, he was living quite a chaotic life, taking substances, and alcohol was a big, huge part of that. And she thanked Christ every day for bringing that structure in, because we didn't have any traditional structure. So what was there? There was only that structure that my grandmother believed in. And she brought that structure to the family and raised my uncles and aunts like that, with those values and with that structure. And it was very important. I think that is why my family made it through the other side. But it also kind of mirrors the story of our community here in Mississaugas, the Credit First Nation. When we moved from the Credit Valley, from the Credit River to here, and, bought some money off of Six Nations of the Thames, bought some land off them. It was Reverend Chief Peter Jones, or Reverend Peter Jones, same guy, who helped convert the entire community over to Christianity before we moved here, when we were still on the Credit River. And that Christianity brought in structure where there was none. Any structure for our community was disappearing. Many of our people were freezing, I hate to say this, freezing drunk in the snowbanks. That's how sad it was. That's how low we reached. And our ceremonies were few and far between, and the knowledge around that. Our population was dwindling. We almost went extinct. Our language faded out. By the time we relocated here, no one in our community spoke Ojibwe or Anishinaabe and 175 or more years ago. Can you imagine that? Now it's coming back. The people from up north came, and the elders, and we have school teaching it in school. The elders are learning it. So we're reclaiming that, right? But we didn't have that. So Christianity gave us that structure and actually, I believe, saved our community, saved our lives at that point. So when we moved here, I can't imagine what it was like being raised on reserve that long ago. But I did hear stories from my grandmother, Lorna Doon, we'd call her as a joke. Lorna, she tells stories of Indian day school and some of the bullying that went on there at the mush hole at the Mohawk residential school there. And here I am, like century and a half later, and building a house here in this community. But I remember the stories that some of the stories were pretty bad. Mind you, there was some good stories. But my mom was born here. She was born on reserve. There used to be a little hospital in Oshwegan in Six Nations of the Grand River. And that's where she was born. It's gone now. And she was raised along with all of her other siblings in a one-room house that sat beside the one-room schoolhouse. That building's still there, the old schoolhouse. And there's a little square of woods there. And I remember 20 years ago going in there with my mom, and she was, moving leaves and sticks and pulling stuff out. And she's like, that's a piece of the stove. I remember the stove. Like, freaked me out, man. So here I am with my ancestors, right? My ancestors are under the soil. That feels really good. But when my mom was 13 years old, the family moved to Buffalo, New York. And years after that, they moved to Hamilton. And that's when my mom met my dad, Trevor Sr. She was sitting on the steps in Hamilton in front of her house. And this guy kept riding by, this skinny guy in a suit and tie, riding by on a motorcycle. And they used to laugh every time because there's the two sisters, Gan and Satch. That was Glenna and Sandra's nicknames, because everybody's got a nickname on this reserve, and probably your reserve too. So Gan and Satch were sitting there laughing at him, and he stopped and said, "What are you laughing at?" And so, that's how it started. He was actually more attracted to my aunt than he was to my mom, but it worked out that my mom ended up in a relationship with them. But my mom didn't want to be Indian. So marrying a white man was perfect, right? She could get away from all that stigma and discrimination and racism and all that shit, all that stuff she experienced while she was growing up, right? And she was light-skinned enough that she could actually pass for white, which is one of the reasons why I turned out so light-skinned. My dad's white and my mom's light-skinned Indian. So my parents married in 1964. That's going back a ways. I was born in 65, but I did the math. They were married about 6 months before I was born, right? Back then, having a child when you're not married is not cool. And my mom already experienced that with her firstborn child, who was a daughter, before me. And she gave her daughter to her sister, my Aunt Donna. There's 3 sisters, corn, beans, and squash. Just kidding, just kidding. There is 3 sisters. Aunt Donna raised my sister, right? But it was a big secret. No one told anyone. All the kids, nobody knew that was my mom's blood daughter. It was like an Indian adoption, an indigenous adoption. That's quite common in the old days and probably still now. It was big, big secret. One of those big, big family secrets that a lot of families have. So, as I told you, my parents got divorced, right? And there's my mom with this 8 and 7-year-old or whatever we were, something like that. She struggled raising us because we were crazy. My boys are crazy, man. And she held down a job, so she wasn't always there. So imagine, we're just running wild all over the place, bare feet, no shirts on, long hair. Like basically, I had hair like this when I was a kid in school, and everybody's all clean cut. We had this long, shaggy hair. And I didn't understand that she used alcohol and prescription drugs to help her not think and feel about what she'd experienced during her upbringing, right? All that multi-generational trauma, that's real. That's real. Gan had mental health problems and physical health problems, spiritual, all of it, emotional. But all of it mostly was undiagnosed except for depression. She did get diagnosed with depression. She even tried suicide multiple times, and a few times she went home to live with her parents, my grandparents, while she was recovering from mental breakdowns, I guess they call it. She was probably getting close to, with Indigenous holistic interventions and ceremony, she was getting close to the source, right? And in Western culture, we're like, oh, that's a mental breakdown. And Indigenous people probably push you further in there, so you feel it. What is that? Let's address these spirits. You know, that's how I understand it now. And I'm going to get into that a bit later, my understanding of it. But, we'd have extended family members come stay with us, women. One time it was a male cousin, older cousin too. But my mom started drinking more and more, and she would hallucinate, especially late at night after so many beers or whatever. And she'd mistake Trevor Jr., me, for Trevor Sr., my father, and she would talk to me as if I was her husband. And there was this role reversal, and it was really messing up my head. Like the child was parenting the parent. There was a role reversal. And I was also protecting my brother at the same time. You go back to bed, you sleep, right? And there was lots of parties that CAAN would host, or she'd go to other parties, but eventually she'd cause a scene, get angry and fighting and throwing stuff, and swearing and getting kicked out of places. And she became really unpopular, and so did we as a family. So as kids, nobody wanted us, those kids at their house. I remember even stealing food sometimes because I was hungry. We didn't have food in the house, so I'd steal a can of tuna. I got caught a couple of times. Felt pretty crappy about that, and put you down, you're a thief. But I was hungry. But even our other relations started shunning us a lot. And I was getting calls at midnight, come get your mom at the bar here. I was 14 or 15 years old, and I'd drive her home, and I started to smoke a lot of marijuana. Started doing a lot of LSD, acid, and taking speed. And as I got older, I started even doing harder drugs, but I never injected. I didn't get that far. I'm not sure why. I don't understand it, but I never did. It even happened all around in front of me and didn't do it. I'd snort it or do other ways, but I never injected. And back when I was a kid, you didn't see that injecting thing. It was rare, very rare. You heard about it, but I never saw that. But now it's like all over the place. I see it all the time. But even back then, when I was in my early teens, I knew I was attracted. Even before that, I knew I was attracted to both girls and boys. But it was really confusing because you talk about boys and that's bad, bad, bad. Ooh, you bad. Just like stealing that can of tuna because you're hungry. You're bad. I'm hungry. I want a boy, But I didn't have any support in that way. But I knew there was like a gay rights movement because I saw that in documentaries. But I also saw terrifying things like police raiding bars and arresting men who would commit suicide because they were priests and teachers and university professors and, respectable people whose lives were ruined because they were exposed as homosexual, and this was bad. And back in those days, I remember when it was okay to be gay, but not if you're a teacher. You weren't allowed to be a teacher. It was against the law. So you could be arrested if a teacher was found in a gay bar. So I remember, getting into bars as a kid. I was 15 years old. I figured out how to get in. And some bars in Toronto, because I lived close enough, some bars in Toronto didn't serve alcohol at all. They weren't really bars at all. There was a huge cover, like 25, 30 bucks. And then you go in and dance. But everybody, of course, was on drugs. It was a drug den. You could buy drugs there. So I'd go out and hustle and get paid for sex. And then I'd have the money for cover, pay the cover, buy some drugs, and I'm set for all evening. And I'm this little kid dancing with, and there's all these predators that come in. Of course, that's the fish tank where you find all the young ones. So there I was, and I remember going back to my mom again. For some reason, this is coming to my head right now. I remember after taking care of my mom, going to bed, steal the car and take it a couple of times, squeal it around, and then miss school the next day. Yeah. And during this time, as a teenager, early teenager, I started hitchhiking first with my cousins, to get around, to go party or whatever, or to leave a party where our older relatives were getting violent or something. We had to get out. We just hitchhike out of there. But then around about when I was 15, I started to hitchhike alone. And I learned how to like suss out each driver, like check them out up and down, check, oh, okay, yeah, yeah. First it was about my safety. Am I safe here? And then one time this one guy picked me up, and of course his question was, do you have a girlfriend, right? I was like, why would he be asking that? And then he offered, because I was hitchhiking to work on Christmas Eve day, because I had to work. And I hitchhiked to work, did my work, and he said, do you want me to pick you up after work? And I said, yeah. I even turned down a ride that I was going to get on my buddy's dirt bike. We used to go up and down the tracks to get to work. And I turned him down. I said, no, I got a ride. So I went with that guy, and I spent the night with him. Well, not the whole night, but I had sex. He paid me for sex on that Christmas Eve. And Christmas is already a hard time for me because I had a lot of bad memories, about being lonely on Christmas and not getting gifts, because my mom's addictions, she'd spend the money on making herself feel okay, right? Because she's dealing with her multi-generational trauma, but unknowingly passing it on. So I remember my grandmother getting me these 6-packs of socks, those tube socks, which are like, what, 25 cents each or something. And I cherished those because it was the only thing, right? Other years, there was no gifts, but she would access a church and they would give us these boxes of old donated games that were used, like board games that were used, a turkey, and just all kinds of stuff. Yeah, but CAAN was triggered by Christmas too. My mom, obviously. And through her trauma, passing it on to us. Doesn't that sound familiar? Multi-generational trauma. So I was looking for a way out of this life. I knew there was some kind of gay world out there, and my strategy for finding that world was through hitchhiking and trying to find gay men and trying to see if I could use them as a ladder to reach this gay community that was out there somewhere, so freaky and so interesting and intriguing and scary. A community where I might be able to find myself, because I didn't know who I was. Yeah. So, that guy who paid me, that happened a lot. We started arranging for him to pick me up and drive me somewhere or whatever. And I'd use the money that he paid me on marijuana, on pot. And then I had to, because it was happening more often, I had to make up stories about where this cash for the marijuana came from, right? I was making up all kinds of stories. And then he asked me, listen, I want to bring one of my older boys over for you to meet. Of course, he wanted to have sex with both of us at the same time. And that's how I met a friend who became a lifelong friend. I'm not going to mention his name because he's not a person that talks about his past. But this person, we did have that threesome. He was 4 years older. He was 21 years old, and I was 17. And the older guy was very careful not to let us talk. He wouldn't let us be in the room for even a second. But he ran out of the room just for a second. And my new friend whispered in my ear, Ridge Tavern, 2 a.m., Sunday. That's all he said to me. I hitchhiked there on that Sunday. There he was sitting on the front steps of that bar, and that became our friendship. So I eventually, I was hitchhiking around with him, and eventually I left home and I quit high school when I was around 17. I only had 8 credits anyway, and I was in high school. This is my 3rd year in high school. I was really screwing up. I was very distracted. I couldn't pay attention to these teachers. I thought they were all idiots. Anyways, I'm sure they were fine individuals, fine human beings. But I moved into a camper trailer and the driveway of my friend's parents, this older guy, the 21-year-old guy. And that was the first time I had penetrative sex with anybody, inserting. So that was freaky. I remember how shaky I was. I was so scared and nervous because I realized how important this was to me. 7 months later, his parents paid us to move out. In those days, $500 got us first and last month's rent and deposits on electric and water or something. I don't know. It was all we had. We were able to get a place. It was a little tiny apartment falling apart. And at that point, I was still hooking or still selling sex. I was getting more interested in drugs and alcohol. And well, alcohol was more expensive. It was kind of a perk. Like sometimes I'd have sex for alcohol. We party for 2 days. I'll have sex with you when you want. And as long as I can live in this luxury, eat this good food and have this good sex, survival sex, I guess some people call it. Eventually I asked this older guy to take me to Toronto because like I was getting closer and closer. I know this gay world's out there. I wanted to choose a street hustler, a boy that was on the street like me, and have a three-way sex with him on the model that he had with this older guy I met, right? So I met Todd. That's how I met Todd. And he became my first real boyfriend. And I thought I was in love, but I realize now, of course, looking back, 17-year-old love, I was in love with an idea. I was in love with the idea of falling in love. I was in love with the idea of having a boyfriend. In love with the idea of this mysterious dark street corner with the lamp from the shade and all that. It was very, very, very exciting. But shortly after that, I got HPV, venereal warts, human papillomia virus. So there I was, my first STI, right? I moved to Hamilton when I was 18 years old. So, and with my roommate, the older guy, I guess he was 22 by then. And and my hustler boy was my boyfriend, right? He lived in Hamilton. That's why I moved there. And I also moved there because I wanted to go to this alternative high school and get back into school. But one night, Todd invited me over to his apartment, and he invited the girls across the hall for dinner too. We all got really drunk. Todd passed out. She invited me over to her place. We had sex, and I realized, oh my God, this was really good. I'm into girls too, aren't I? And I left Todd, and I started a relationship with her. And she moved in as a third roommate with the 22-year-old and I, my buddy. And Todd, my ex, tried a couple of suicide attempts and went into intensive therapy. Then Rose moved in. She got pregnant. Against all advice, I didn't wear a condom, right? Yes, I passed on HPV to her too, or maybe she already had it. I don't know. She was already sexually active before she had sex with me. But our relationship was breaking down. Her family found out that I was bisexual, or what, as they called it, gay or queer. Queer wasn't a word we used back then. It was a word used against us. We didn't take that word and own it and use it against others at that point. So queer was a really bad thing to be called. And they set up an appointment for the baby to be aborted. Shortly after, we ran out of town, her and and we escaped to way up to Sault Ste. Marie because I used to live there, right? I didn't have any other idea. And we stayed up there until after the time limit for when you can't have an abortion anymore. She had been pregnant for too long to have an abortion. We came back, had a great big fight, and the family got involved. There was fist fights and ambulances. We broke up. The baby was born, but I still stayed around for a year, in visitations, and sometimes I'd have the baby for a day and that kind of thing. So as a father at 19 years old, I was scared. Rose was treated for HPV. The baby was treated just in case for HPV. And my son was born, but his name was not put on the birth certificate for many of the same reasons why they wanted to have an abortion in the first place. And it wasn't my decision. I didn't even have any say in his naming, which probably is a good thing because I would have called him Moonbeam or some crazy thing like that. That's what I really wanted to call him, Moonbeam. For some reason, I love that, the way that sounds and the idea of it. But I didn't even have my First Nation status or my Indian status yet then, because the Indian Act said that an Indian woman, when she married a non-Indian, would lose her treaty rights. And my dad was white, so she lost her treaty rights. Her card was taken away. But at the same time, a white woman who married an Indian man would gain Indian status and get access to Indigenous, First Nations treaty rights. until BC 31 came along in the early 80s or mid 80s. And I was the first one to apply for my status, and I received it, got access to my treaty rights, and then other members of my immediate family began to follow suit. Now, my son's 41, or will be in August, and he's now trying to get my name put on his birth certificate and then apply for his birthright, for his treaty rights, for his Indian status, so he can live in the home that I moved into 2 years ago, that I built here. And after him, my ancestors, I hope, will continue to live in this community, in this house. So I feel really good about that. But even after my son was born, I still did a lot of drugs and alcohol, had multiple sex partners and unprotected sex, transactional sex, all of it, got into some hard drugs, never too much, but enough. But my dad reemerged into my life when I was about 23. And he said he wanted to rebuild a relationship and that he had recently divorced his second wife. And I'm going to go back a bit in time here. So he remarried after he divorced my mom. About 10 years later, he remarried and married to another woman. And they had 2 sons together. So I had 2 half-brothers who were 100% non-Indigenous. One was 11 years younger and one's 13 years younger. And I remember back then there was a point where he told my brother and I can't see you anymore. You're going to have to find somebody as a father figure because I'm leaving this now, because you're a disruption to my new life and the raising of my new 2 kids and my marriage. So therefore, I'm not going to see you anymore. I pretended like I didn't care. I'm tough. Fuck you. Screw you. I didn't really understand what was going on, but it was a huge blow to my self-esteem and my self-worth. And of course, I carried that with me, that rejection. Do I have rejection issues? Yeah. Do I have imposter issues? Yeah. Do I have half of the issues on the list? Yeah, probably. And my mom was distracted by trauma and addiction as she was raising us, with my father saying he didn't want to have anything to do with us. So then he comes back and he wants to re-spark the relationship. I said, yeah. And then I talked my younger brother into it, and he said, yeah. And then my dad brought my 2 half-brothers in. We had like family reunions, so that we still have family reunions, even though my dad's passed on. We kept that going. So I do thank my father for that, for coming back, apologizing, and trying to make it right. But during that time, when my father came back into my life, I remember him. I sat down. He was watching. There used to be VHS tapes by then. There was no internet, right? So that VHS tape he was watching, and it was a 4-hour lecture by this guy, and it was called "The Superstition of Materialism," and it was talking about spirituality and explaining how he'd hold up a chair and say that you think this is real, but it's just a superstition that this is real material. And he went back down to the subatomic level and talked about molecules and atoms. And an atom has a nucleus, tiny little dot, and then this proton, an electron circling around it. But most of that atom is space. So most of what we see is space. It's not solid. It's mostly space, like outer space between these tiny dots. And then if you look at an electron and a proton, what are they? Are they even anything? They're vibrations. And to explain all this to me, I was just like, wow. And then he said, the way the way the universe really exists is a swirling gases and interacting particles that become things and then split apart. And it's like when you pour gasoline on top of the water, how it's all colorful and swirly. And that's how he explained it. And I started to get these visualizations. And you know what? I was like, I'm not an atheist. I believe in something. And I believe that human beings represent the part of the universe that is self-aware. Therefore, the universe is self-aware because we're part of that stardust. So that started to be like, hey, that has to be right. That's science. That has to be right. We are self-aware, therefore the universe is self-aware. And there are other life forms out there that are self-aware that are also part of the self-awareness of the universe. The universe is a self-aware being. So that freaked me out, right? Then I realized, okay, what about all of eternity that happened before I was born? Okay, that's no small question. Okay, and the other question, what about all of eternity after I was born? That's another huge question. Okay, and then we got this tiny little spark in the middle of that, which is my life. What's more important, eternity or my life? I think eternity is much more important. But to me, I'm on this earth walk for this tiny little amount of time, and it's thrilling, it's exciting. I want to be here and be healthy and experience this to the best of my ability, as deeply as I possibly can by staying in touch with the universal energies, right? So I woke up a little bit. I mean, a little bit of light was getting under my eyelids. I didn't understand anything, but I understood something, right? Something is out there. And that also brings me back to what I said about testing. Testing is just that little flash in the pan. What about everything before in my life that led up to that testing? What about everything that happens after that testing? What's more important? The way I live my life or the moment of that test? The test is important because it gives me knowledge. But what is most important is my health, my earth walk, the universal energy and aligning with that. Okay, so I'm getting onto something here, right? I'm onto something. All the while, since I was 18 until I was like 25, I had low-paying jobs, security guard, and later, alarm monitoring station supervisor, monitoring alarms and holdups and fires and stuff. So I was slowly saving money, and by 1990, remember, that was the year I got diagnosed, but I didn't get tested yet. I had saved up $8,000, which back then was 35 years ago, was a lot of money. Take you a long way. And I only was able to do that through a payroll savings plan because I always had a job. Even, so I had money because I was, making money through sex and my job. So I got to save money. I quit my job. I gave up my apartment and I flew to Europe on my 25th birthday. And I flew as a gift to myself and hitchhiked around Europe for 5 months. Remember, my nickname is Traveler from my uncles? I was having sex with guys I was attracted to when I could and unprotected. It was a worldly education. I visited Belgium, France, Andorra, Spain, Portugal, Italy, the Vatican, which is a country, Austria, Germany, and the Netherlands, and then back to Belgium, and then I flew home. And while I was away, one of my best friends tested HIV positive, right? 1990. Look at the peak of HIV infections. 1990, it peaked way up, right? Everybody I knew was getting HIV, and people were dying. And I remember also at the same time when I came back, I found out that that old guy who used to pick me up hitchhiking and pay me for sex, he was murdered by two boys that he picked up, and they stole his car. So my anxiety was really high, and I was like, okay, there's a message for me here. Something would happen when I was away, and someone left me a message, and I need to figure this out. And I laid awake at night a lot. I had no, because I spent all my money, right? All I had was renting a room out of a guy I called my gay father, a different older guy who I hustled with at first for sex, but then became a mentor of mine and actually gave me a job and a place to live, and there was no sex involved after that. He became my lifelong mentor. But I had no phone, no TV. Of course, we had no internet and no cell service. This is back in dinosaur age. I had no car, no job, no source of income, except if I could make some money. Mind you, I was getting older, 25 years old. So this was all freaking me out. I walked into a mall, a clinic in a mall, a doctor's clinic in a mall, and I asked for an HIV test. And he tried to talk me out of it. I had to convince him that I deserved to be tested by telling them that I had unprotected anal sex. So he did test me. And back then, I had to wait for 4 weeks to get test results. And imagine, I got no phone. I'm sitting alone, no TV in my room alone, in this tiny little room. and I'm waiting for these test results. And then that doctor finally phoned me and said, your test results were inconclusive. Your white blood cells are sticking together in a funny way, unusual way. I want to send you to a hematologist. So I waited a month and a half or 2 months for that appointment. Imagine the anxiety. 4 weeks plus this is we're up to 3 months now. Then she drew more blood. Another 3 or 4 weeks waiting, so that's 4 months. Then I got my HIV test result over the phone. The hematologist called me. You have HIV. You have tested positive. I've set up an appointment for you in 6 weeks at the HIV clinic. So now we're at 5.5 months from the time I first decided to go get tested till the time I got to see a doctor, right? This is an HIV specialist. That's Sherlock McMaster Hospital in Hamilton. Imagine the stress. There's no effective treatment. So you get tested. Great, I'm going to die. No cure. Millions dying worldwide of this strange new pandemic affecting the gay disease, the homo disease. But by this time, they knew it wasn't just gay men. They knew it was, they started to figure out how it was transmitted and how it was not transmitted. At the same time, I was in a very abusive relationship with a man. Very sexy man, but very, very abusive. So at my first HIV clinic appointment, it was a woman doctor. She was a fine doctor, non-Indigenous, of course. Are there Indigenous HIV immunologists? I don't know. And I remember when she walked into the room, I didn't know it was going to be a woman. And me, a young man, I was like, I wanted pumped up a little bit. And I remember her chuckling under her voice at me, which I thought, geez, okay, she's laughing at me. She was rather cold, and that's the way. That's how medicine is in the West, impersonal. But cold metal stuff on me, and just the facts, ma'am. Just little black specks on a white piece of paper. That was that appointment. But the intake person, the secretary, convinced me to talk to a clinic counselor. I didn't wanna. And she said, yeah, we have a counselor here, and we ask everybody who's been newly diagnosed just to have a short chat, even 5 minutes with this person. And if you don't think it's a good fit, you don't have to come back and see him. But we really encourage you to do that. So I did. Turned out to be a nice guy. And he asked me if I wanted to set up some sessions. He says, what you shared with me, I think you're stressed out and it wouldn't hurt to talk to get some of that out. And I was like, yeah, you're right. I was sitting there for 4 months in my room all alone, no phone, no TV or nothing. Sure, yeah, all right, I'll come in. So I came in next time carrying a bottle of Pepto-Bismol because I had such indigestion from my diet, but mostly from stress, right? And after a few appointments, I was like, hey, we're wasting time. I'm just talking about my childhood. I'm talking about my brother and my mom and stuff. We're not even talking about HIV. And he said, well, I don't counsel HIV, he said. I counsel human beings, right? This wasn't about HIV. This is about you, Trevor. This is about you and some of the things you tell me. It sounds like you could use some counseling. And I said, I don't want to just talk therapy, waste my time, blah, 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 big deal. I want an intervention. I want to address some of this shit. So I said, okay, what about creative visualization? And he explained the process to me. And it went like this. Then my next appointment, he told me to bring in a picture of me as a little kid, like 5 years old, 4 years old. So I bring in this picture and I'm sitting there. He says, now I want you to hold that picture in front of you. And now look at the picture and imagine yourself as him. Now close your eyes and keep that picture in your head. Keep there you are. That's you. And you're there. You're him. And then he said, now where is he? What's surrounding him? And suddenly it all came colored in. And I'm like, we're at a barbecue in the backyard at my mom's place. My brother's with me. And he says, what's going on? Who's there? My uncles are there and they're all partying. And oh, and how do you feel? I'm scared. I'm afraid. Why? Because I know there's going to be violence. Okay, so what happened? What's happening? My aunt has a roller skate and she's smashing the grill and the lights of the car and the windshield and smashing and people were running around and they're fighting. And I stepped on a needle and no one cares. And I'm crying and crying and crying and crying and everyone's fighting and no one will come and blah, blah, blah. Right. I'm not going to get into any further about it, but and then he says, okay, now I'm talking to the adult Trevor in the room now. Trevor, don't open your eyes. I want you to walk over, your adult self, walk over to that child. Okay. What does that child need? Be the child. What does the child need? He needs a hug and he needs to hear that everything's going to be okay and that I love you. So you say that to him. Tell him that you love him. Everything's going to be okay. And I did. And I started crying so hard. But that went away because it was an intervention. It wasn't just talk therapy, blah, blah, blah. And what time you want to meet next week? And that's what I insisted on, right? And we did it out a couple of times. And eventually I stopped seeing him. But it helped me, and I stopped seeing him when I realized it just started to be talking sessions. And then I was like, okay, no. But he also talked me into taking AZT, which was a treatment for what they were using for treatment for HIV back in the 90s, right? And it was originally given to cancer patients, but it was decided that it was too toxic and it was killing the cancer patients. And so they decided, why don't we give it to, it's somewhat effective for people living with HIV, but it was horrible. I did it for 2 weeks and it made me feel like I was dying. And I made the decision, I'm going to try to live well. I want to live well and as healthy as I can. Maybe HIV will someday become like diabetes and it will be treatable and it'll be like a chronic illness. I didn't know I was praying. I know now that was a prayer. That was a prayer. Was I in ceremony? I don't know. Was that ceremony I had with that non-Indigenous guy where I was teleporting into the past and my spirit was hugging my child's spirit? Like, was it? I don't know. But anyway, I got off this AZT and I decided, no, I'm going to just live. I'd rather die of AIDS in 2 years than live for 3 years like this, because this is horrible. This is not living. So, 1990 diagnosis, couple years therapy. I borrowed money and on a whim, I went to Jamaica on a budget, set up a tent on the beach. On the beach, I met this girl at my age named, I'm not going to name her, but I met her. And she walked out of I was smoking a joint at 7 a.m. on the beach and she walked out of the ocean topless. It was like a dream. It was like a dream. And we started talking. At first, she ignored me. I ran into her later. And we hung out. We did magic mushrooms. We went snorkeling. We cuddled all night. It was beautiful. Because she said, do you want to come back to my tent and sleep with me? And I was like, I should tell her I'm HIV positive. And I should probably tell her I haven't been with a woman in 7 years. But I didn't. I just went with her and I slept with her. And that's how we cuddled. And we kissed. And we whispered sweet nothings into each other's ears. And I was leaving the next day, so she wrote her contact information on a napkin, and then we became had a pen pal, romantic relationship. Eventually, she said, I'm coming to visit you in Toronto. And then I told her. And she said, I bet you thought I was going to hang up. I'm coming anyway. So we came. We had sex. I used 2 condoms, which I know you're not supposed to do, but I did it because I didn't want her to get HIV. We went camping in Algonquin in the cold. We held each other so closely, and yet if we didn't, we would have froze to death. That's how cold it was. After getting, bump ahead another year, we ended up flying together, flying to Amsterdam, and we hitchhiked around Europe and Turkey for about 3 months. And we decided if we can travel together for 3 months, we could live together. We were in love. We fell in love. I moved to Seattle because, I had my status. We're part of the J Treaty. So if you're status Indians are allowed to work and live. I have a social security number in the US. And I learned landscape installation and organic growing methods. My friends were artists and craftspeople who loved their careers. I was doing hard physical work. I was growing organic food and experiencing and making music and dancing and celebrating life and engaged in activism and around socialism and the environment. I was learning to care about myself and learning to care about community. I was in transformation. I was learning little bits about myself. But now I'm gonna talk about a little bit about healthy sex here for a second, because I haven't even talked about, really haven't touched on it. Sex within a loving relationship is extremely sacred to me. It's sex. Having an orgasm when you're in love with a person is like 10 times as significant as just, sex for sex sake. It's different. It's different. There's different elements of your spirit that get involved. I remember one time she became my wife, this woman, because we were together for 10 years and she didn't get HIV. Well, one time we were having the best sex in our little rented house with our organic garden out the back window. And as we were having this beautiful, like spiritual sex, it was getting darker and darker and darker and darker outside. And it was freaking both of us out a little bit, but we just kept going because we were in the groove, right? We were in the mode. We always used a condom. That didn't take away all this healthy living and organic farming. It felt good. I felt healthy. I was connecting with the earth and nurturing the growth of healing plants and delivering healthy food to the people, and it felt spiritual. We both climaxed together, and right at that moment was the loudest clap of thunder. Loudest clap. The glasses in the kitchen cupboard shut, like the whole house shook. And then the hail came, big hail, half the size of a golf ball. And we both looked at each other, almost afraid of each other. And we knew that we tapped into something. We both felt it. We couldn't explain it. To this day, I will never, ever forget it. And I know she won't ever forget it too. When I told her that I found, we still talk sometimes because I still love her. There's still a place for her in my heart. When I told her that my spirit name came to me and that I was Thunderbird Heart, she said, "I'm not surprised. I knew that." And she's not Indigenous. But anyway, we started our organic farm, actually. We moved to BC. And while I was on Vancouver Island doing our very first organic farm, the mother of my son reached out to me and said, we told your son that that this guy isn't his father because he left and his father's out there somewhere and he's scared. So will you come? And so I did. And eventually I moved to Ontario and we continued to organic farm there. But I'm going to wrap up in about 10 minutes. I want to leave some time for questions or comments or any kind of discussion you might want to have. But I developed AIDS in 1998. Even though in 1996, 2 years before, in Vancouver at the International AIDS Conference, they made a huge announcement that they came up with these antiretroviral medications. And if you took 2 or 3 at the same time, like what they call a cocktail, that it was beating the virus down so low that people were getting healthy. They were getting off their deathbeds and they were going back to work. But I didn't believe in it. It's not conspiracy necessarily, although I was listening to conspiracy theories. But I was like, they don't know what's going to happen. Is this going to kill me? It's going to save my life for 2 years, and then we're going to die of some other horrible death in 5 years, because they didn't know. They didn't have this long-term research, and my self-esteem was still quite low. And I was still experiencing a lot. I worked through some of my trauma, but a lot was still there. But my son and my son moved in with us, right, for 3 years. And my son and my wife convinced me that I was in denial. And they were like, get on treatment for us if you won't do it for yourself. And I did. I did it for them. And I got on treatment. Actually, I started treatment on December 1st, 1998. World AIDS Day. I didn't know that at the time because I wasn't involved, right? And the next year, 1999, a few months later, CAAN was only 2 years old. And the Canadian Aboriginal AIDS Network, they were having their annual general meeting. And Art Zocol, who was working for Red Road at the time, one of the organizational members of CAAN, invited me. He was a board director too of CAAN, invited me to Toronto where the annual general meeting would be. And I decided to go. They gave me a scholarship and I attended. And instead of going into the, breakout workshops and skills building, I went into a 2-day healing ceremony with other Indigenous people living with HIV and their partners and stuff. It was incredible. And there were two women conducting. One was a ancestral Indigenous scientist. The other one was a psychiatrist. So they're West merging with Indigenous science. And we had that healing circle, and I felt like something was removed from me. Something that I didn't want was removed, and I could see more clearly again, another level. My eyes opened a little more from that, my spirit eyes, right? And I got that expression from Doris Peltier. I love that expression because I use it all the time. It fits me. And after that, I learned that a Haida elder was looking for me in the conference because I'm from Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and Toronto's our traditional territory. She tracked me down, said, thank you, gave me this tobacco and said, I want you to go find an elder in back home in your community, give them this tobacco and thank them for allowing us to have this meeting on your traditional territory. She was teaching me about my own culture. And I learned a lot about my own culture just by being engaged with CAAN and all these healers, all these allies, all these scientists. And I did that, and I went and I didn't know any elders, so I went and knocked on the door of chief and council. The chief comes out and I handed it to her, told her I have AIDS, and she says, that's great. She took the medicine. We will open our tribal, our council meetings with these tobacco. We're going to use it all. It's not going to go to waste. And then she said, I want you to go see your cousin Sheila, and I tell the story a lot, at the community health center, and let her know what you told me. And so I told her, and she invited me. She said, oh, wow, that's great. Can you come and talk in 3 weeks at our HIV workshop in the community center? And I was like, yep. So I did. And that was the very first time, right? And that led to other speaking engagements and eventually getting more involved, right? But I was also at this time, I needed to see another counselor, right? I didn't, and the counselor I went to, when I told him that I was Indigenous, he said, yeah, but you're not really Indian, are you? Like, you don't like do the powwows and the ceremonies and, like all that, smoke the pipe. And I'm like, well, I go to powwows and stuff sometimes, but yeah, I guess you're right. I'm not a real Indian. But he shut me down on that. And I realized that wasn't a door opening for my culture. He did help me emotionally and mentally. But there's overlap, right? He wasn't able to help me mentally as it overlaps into the spiritual. He wasn't able to help me emotionally as it overlaps into the spiritual, because they are connected. And I understand that now, right? But eventually, Jackie left and went back to Seattle 10 years later in 2002. I was better. I broke the deal. I was supposed to die, and then she was on her way. I mean, that was basically our understanding we had. There was no cure when we got together. There was no treatment. And so she's stuck in this relationship with this guy she thought she'd only be with for 2 years, 10 years later, and it was dysfunctional, she stayed through my dementia and everything. I don't even remember half the stuff that I said or did. My son reminds me of stuff, and I'm like, what? I don't remember that. So she went back to Seattle. My son went off to college. So there I was. I had been a farmer all this time. Here I am on this old farm alone. I was a farmer. I was a husband. I was a landscape installer. I was a father. But now I lived alone and isolated. Who was I? Who am I? I had been living large and with a little bit of money, trading for food and meat, and we lived large. But now here I was, living out in the middle of nowhere. I realized I needed to get back to the city, get back to Toronto, get reconnected, and be surrounded in resources. And I connected with two-spirited people of the First Nations and OHAS, the Ontario Aboriginal HIV/AIDS Strategy. two of the founding organizations from CAAN. I got on the board of Two Spirits, and I was elected president shortly after. I got on the working group of OHAS. Wasn't incorporated then, so I got on the working group. I was the chairperson of the working group. And I was on the board of CAAN too, from 2002 to 2005 as treasurer. So for those 3 years, it was like getting a bachelor's degree in HIV community responses and activism, right? So, and then in 2005, I was the incorporating president when OHAS went from a working group and they became an organization, an incorporated organization. So 2005, I quit all those boards. I resigned from all the boards and I got off disability. I moved down to Niagara from Toronto. I moved in with my mom because she was burning towels and, you know, her mental health was getting worse. I wanted to live with her and take care of her. And she actually died two years later. I took care of her, you know, and I felt so good about that. So good that I was strong enough to do that. But my first work was doing some organizing for the International Two Spirit Gathering for Two Spirits. And, you know, Laverne Monette, the, you know, creator of OHAS, she taught me everything I know about harm reduction. She's the one that convinced me it's the right thing to do and that it's all about love and that harm reduction equals, Indigenous harm reduction equals reducing the harms of colonialism. Art Cole, one of my most important mentors, the biggest heart of any Two-Spirit that I've ever known. But I started to realize that it was harm reduction that helped me to access my culture, my ceremonies, my teachings, my elders. Like, help me to be here, help me to build this house, help me on my path, helped remove some of those bad spirits that I needed to let go. Some of the teachers that taught me good things and gave me good things, but bye, I've learned all I can from you, right? And I realized that I know why I'm here on this earth, to do this work. But like, where's this path leading? I'm 60, right? I'm still alive. 5 seconds later, I'm still alive. I'm still alive 5 seconds later after that. So maybe I'm going to live for a little bit longer. So, you know, even though all this time I'm on a healing path with access to teachers and healers and ancestral Indigenous scientists, academics and peers and mentors, still drinking alcohol heavily and smoking all this pot and smoking a pack of cigarettes a day and even doing other hard drugs once in a blue moon. Oh, there's that moon again. Hey. Aho, yeah. Anyway, but they didn't judge me through all this. They said I was okay, just the way I was, even though I continued to consume substances. You know how much that helped me? I'm okay. I'm all right. Right? I'm all right. And saying that over and over has helped me to be all right, to be okay. And of course, I continued to do these substances, right? Can you imagine 20 years of this and I'm still really healthy? And I don't understand why, but I'm starting to get embarrassed. Like, it seems like I'm not thankful. And otherwise, why would I continue to put all these substances into my body? With living with HIV, I've never been hospitalized for anything HIV related. But, you know, I do recognize my own personal agency. And when I say personal agency, I mean, I no longer need service agencies because I have my own personal agency. So I know that I can navigate the healthcare system without a service agency. I can use my personal agency to navigate this healthcare system. And these other colonial, harmful, violent structures, I can do that on my own now. But I still need to be connected to my own heart and my family and my community and all of my relations to feel healthier. This is my strength. That's where the strength comes from, my interconnectedness, my heartberry, connected with those runners to all you, with all your heartberries, connected to all your relatives, all my relations, you know? And I can count on them for help if I need it. And they can count on me. I'm part of something a lot bigger than myself. Universal energy. I'm part of that. Even the HIV sector, the health sector, the indigenous holistic health response and all those healers and elders and human rights movements, that's all gives me strength. And I I understand these levitation dreams I've always had my whole life. Even when I'm stressed and going through all the stuff, I have this dream where I'm standing in front of someone and I'm like, watch this. And I take a breath in, I raise my arms and I go, and I slowly raise into the sky. I know that those are Thunderbird dreams now. They were very sacred, ceremonial dreams I've had all my life since I was a child. And now I know why, because I found my name. You know, I took care of my mother until she died 18 years ago. I took care of my dad until he died a couple of years ago. A great honor. And I was the best one suited to do this. And it helps me to understand who I am. My dad passed away the same time that I just finished building this house here in my community of Mississaugas of the Credit. Years before, I'd put myself on the waiting list and, to get a loan to build the house from my reserve. My name came up in 2022. I had all the blueprints, a certificate of possession for the land, had all my ducks in order. And I'd saved quite a lot of money to cover all of the extras because I had to clear this acre of land to build the house. It's like this is a mature oak forest. But looking back after living here for 2 years, I started to ask myself, have I been in ceremony for a long, long time for this? I suddenly realized that for each penny that I spend, I need to be careful, right? I realized I couldn't just waste money on little things anymore. Like, oh, I want a new jacket, new leather jacket. Ooh, $1,000. I don't think so. Any money I made needed to go into investing in myself, not only the old Trevor, because I'm investing in, if I get old, investing in me, but investing in my ancestors. My ancestors can live here long after I've traveled to the spirit world. Because, sacrifices. My car got totaled. I lost all this bling and AirPods and computers and electric toothbrush, a whole luggage full of cherished possessions, all my dress clothes, and I couldn't replace it because I was putting all my money. And this almost feels like it was a giveaway. Now that I look back, reflecting, it's a giveaway. I needed to make sacrifices and give things away to receive this gift of this, my forever home, my health. Housing is health, land back. These are indigenous, what do you call them? The indigenous social determinants of health, right? Since moving to my home fire community, so many doors have opened in terms of access to healing and ceremony. I want to transform into the person I was meant to be. I've been accessing deeply sacred ceremonies and sweats, traditional teachings, and I've even been sitting on the Thunderbird drum with other two spirits, learning the protocol, songs and prayers, and going into ceremony like other two spirit groups across Turtle Island, going back to the original source and asking the ancestors for the original teachings, because it's been taken away from our people. We can't find the human beings. If we find one, they have just a little piece. We need to know what our roles and responsibilities are. We want to be part of bringing balance back to our communities. We want to be part of that healing, not just for us, but for everybody. A couple of months ago, I participated in a 3-day ceremony, like a retreat. The ceremony, it was set up as a healing retreat. It wasn't talk therapy, because I hate that. And I was promised there wouldn't be. It was a full-on holistic intervention. 4 medicine people, 5 other participants, including myself. And we each did the hard work of ridding ourselves of certain energies that were holding us back and making us sick. You can call them dark spirits, you can call them evil spirits, but we thanked them with love and sent them back with love. Thank you for helping me. This intervention, it involved the mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual aspects of our well-being. It opened me up. I connected with spirit. I was meditating. I was flying through the universe. That I learned how to do that in ceremony or any time. I can do that now. I can connect with my own energy and synchronize it with like the energy that's all around me. This approach, it doesn't dismiss Western science, but rather it showed me how Western science is slowly catching up to ancestral indigenous science. I don't think it's indigenous science versus Western knowledge. It's the same damn thing. I've learned that spiritual law is a constant in the universe, no matter what culture we come from. The law is the law. Science is science. During that 3-day retreat, that's when my spirit name came to me. I am Beneshio Dewan, Thunderbird Heart. Now I know I have that dream over and over of levitating. I know why I had that experience of that thunder being passion in Seattle with my wife. Could that have been my Thunderbird Heart energy synchronizing with the thunder beings above us? I know it. I feel it in my body. I think I know it. I don't think it. I know it. Say it. I know it. Finally, at 60 years old, I found my spirit name. I'm connecting those dots. Remember, those berries are the dots, those hearts. I'm connecting. What I wish for everyone is that as children, that they have this wisdom then, as our communities used to be. So our children grow up in ceremony every day. This morning I woke up and I was like, I said a swear word because I had a stressful dream about the reports and work that I have to do. And I was like, don't start your day like that. And then I realized I woke up 2 hours earlier and said my cat's name. So it made me feel better because I love my cat and I said my cat's name with love and I let him out because, the sun was coming up at 4:30 in the morning. But all too often, unfortunately, healthcare today, it attempts to silo health and focus on just one aspect of health in isolation of all other indicators of holistic health. As Indigenous people, as we continue to take back the knowledge that was taken away from us, we realize our own self-agency. As we take back our power and become healthier, other cultures are now coming to Indigenous groups and asking, how do you do that? You know, how, how did you do that? Can you teach us? Indigenous people are part of the solution. We can help. Let's talk about that. We're not just asking for handouts. Oh, come help us, walk with us because we need help. We're part of the solution. Indigenous people can help. And recently, someone gifted me a dress, and I wore it into the lodge, into the sweat lodge. And I have never worn a dress before, but she just saw me and she asked me, would you like to wear a dress? And I said, okay, I want to try it out. And it's a moon dress. Look how beautiful it is. See all the different stages of the moon. And I'm sure the strawberry moon's in there somewhere too. And it's a very light pink color. And I cherish it. And I'm going to wear it into the sweat lodge again at the water ceremony this weekend. I'm 60 now, but I don't think my work is finished. I could die tomorrow, or I could die in 80 years, right? Or not in 80 years, at 80. I could die in 20 years. Did I say that out loud? Part of my everyday walk and ceremony is the awareness of my mortality. I will die. We all will die. It's important for me to think about this, right? Every day. So I can appreciate every day of this earth walk when I contemplate all of this eternity that came before my life and all of this eternity that will happen after my life. All of the eternity that happened before I got tested and all of the eternity that happened after I got tested for HIV. I guess I am living in ceremony. Maybe we're all living in ceremony. So thank you, Sienna, for inviting me. That's all I have to share at